What do you do when the person you love and trust the most betrays you in the worst way possible? In this raw and emotional story, I open up about how my world was turned upside down when I discovered my girlfriend of 3.5 years had been cheating on me with my best friend, the same friend I had introduced into my life. From the gut-wrenching realization to the painful moments of heartbreak and betrayal, follow my journey of pain, anger, and eventual strength as I learned to heal and rebuild my life. This is a story of trust shattered, but also of finding resilience when everything seems lost. Before we go, please subscribe this channel and like this video. For 3.5 years, I had believed in something that turned out to be nothing but an illusion. The woman I loved, the person who had held my heart, was not who I thought she was. Jane had always seemed so perfect, like the one who was meant to stay with me forever. But as time went on, the cracks began to show, and in the end, it all came crumbling down. We met when I was young, barely an adult, and she was a beautiful soul, someone who seemed to understand me better than anyone else. We had built a life together, sharing our dreams, our fears, our hopes for the future. The relationship was meant to be our foundation, our safe place in a world that often felt too overwhelming. But what I didn't know was that while I was building a life with her, she was building a secret life of her own with someone else. Joe was a friend of mine, a guy I had trusted, a guy I had spent countless hours training with, someone I considered my brother. We had shared stories, laughter, and had even confided in each other during moments of doubt. Little did I know that all along he was plotting to steal what I had worked so hard to build. He was the last person I would have suspected, but betrayal is a strange thing. It hides in plain sight. When Jane first started coming to my training sessions, it was because she wanted to spend time with me, or at least that's what I believed. It wasn't long before I noticed the subtle changes in her behavior when Joe was around. The way she looked at him, the way she acted, it was as though she saw him through a lens I didn't have. It was uncomfortable at first, but I brushed it off, convincing myself that it was just my insecurity talking. But the truth couldn't be ignored forever. As the months passed, the signs became impossible to miss. Joe was no longer just my friend. He was becoming someone I had to compete with for Jane's attention. The way she smiled at him, the inside jokes they shared, the way she would find excuses to be near him, it felt like a knife in my chest every time I saw it. I was left in the shadows of their growing connection, and yet I was too blind to see it for what it was. When I lost my job, everything seemed to spiral out of control. I was already struggling with uncertainty, with the fear of not knowing where my next step would lead. And that's when the cracks in our relationship widened. During my unemployment, Jane started pulling away even more. She was becoming distant, absent, and I was left alone in the house, surrounded by silence and uncertainty. I had no idea what she was doing, but deep down, I knew something wasn't right. It was only when I discovered the truth that everything came crashing down. Jane had been seeing Joe behind my back. She had been meeting him, going to the gym with him, having lunch dates, and even sending intimate pictures of herself to him. I confronted her about it, and she promised she would stop. But promises made in the heat of the moment are never enough to heal the damage caused by betrayal. I tried to hold on. I tried to be understanding, to work through the issues we were facing. But it was clear that Jane had already made her choice. She started avoiding me more and more. She rejected every attempt I made to connect with her. No more dates, no more love, no more intimacy. I was just a ghost drifting through the relationship, trying desperately to revive something that was already dead. One day, after a particularly painful conversation, Jane told me she was going out with Joe. I didn't know it then, but that would be the night everything changed. I stayed up waiting for her, watching the clock tick slowly, each second feeling like an eternity. But she didn't come home. Her car was still in the driveway, and I couldn't understand why she hadn't returned. Hours passed. I waited, and still nothing. My heart sank with each passing minute. At 11:30 p.m. I received the message. We need to talk. I knew what was coming. I didn't need her to say it. The doubt, the fear, the betrayal, all of it came rushing back in that moment. I had hoped for closure, for a face-to-face conversation, but she refused. She ignored me. She couldn't even show up to say goodbye in person. I was left waiting, alone, in the quiet of the night, knowing that our relationship was over, but it didn't end there. 30 minutes after I left my house, Jane and Joe were together spending the night in my home. I had trusted both of them, but they had betrayed that trust in the worst possible way. Joe, the man I had called a friend, had crossed the line. He had stolen from me in the most intimate way imaginable, and he didn't even have the decency to own up to it. For the next few weeks, Jane and Joe paraded their new relationship for all to see. They shared photos, posted about each other constantly, and rubbed their newfound happiness in my face. I had been nothing but loyal to her, but she had thrown it all away for a fleeting thrill. She rejected me mentally and emotionally, while Joe celebrated his victory, unaware of the storm he had just stepped into. The pain I felt was unbearable. Every day I struggled to find a way to move on. I had been the one who tried. I had been the one who fought for us. But in the end, I had been the only one willing to try. Jane and Joe were already gone, and I was left to pick up the pieces of a shattered heart. Months passed, and the pain began to dull. But the scars remained. It wasn't just the betrayal that hurt. It was the emotional manipulation, the mind games, the way Jane made me feel like I was never enough. She had convinced me that I was the problem, that I was the one who wasn't trying hard enough, when in reality I had given her everything I had. And yet, it was never enough for her. When I found out she was pregnant, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Part of me felt vindicated, knowing that the child wasn't mine, but a larger part of me felt a deep sense of sadness for Joe. He had no idea what he was walking into. She had already shown me who she truly was, and now he would get a front row seat to the chaos she had created. But through all the pain and betrayal, I began to see the light at the end of the tunnel. I had spent so much time mourning the relationship, so much time wondering what went wrong, but in the end I realized that I was better off without them. They had tried to tear me down, but all they did was make me stronger. I got back to my training. I pushed myself harder than ever before. I won competitions, secured a new job, and started rebuilding my life. I found solace in the things I loved, and the people who stood by me during the hardest time of my life helped me realize that not all was lost. I wasn't just a victim of betrayal. I was a survivor. As the months passed, I realized that the universe had a strange way of balancing things out. Jane and Joe, once so sure of themselves, were now facing the consequences of their actions. Their happiness was fleeting, and their relationship built on lies would eventually crumble. I knew it. I had seen it before. People who try to build something on a foundation of lies never get far. In the end, I was at peace. I had healed. I had grown. And I knew that I deserved better. I deserved someone who would love me for who I was, who would never betray my trust or make me feel like I was not enough. I was no longer defined by the betrayal. I was defined by the strength it took to move on and create a new life for myself. I learned more in those months than I ever could have imagined. Pain has a way of opening your eyes to the truth, and now I could see the world in a new light. I had lost everything, but in the process I had gained so much more.